Hello everyone and welcome to episode number 2 of Driving Newfoundland. In this episode we take you west from Deer Lake on Highway 1, or sometimes called the Trans-Canada Highway. We head our way to Corner Brook, Newfoundland, and check out the Captain Cook Historical Site. We then jump back on Highway 1 towards Highway 460. We visit the infamous Hidden Falls that, to our surprise, only runs in the springtime. We then head into Cape St. George, and at the tip, we drive down to the Acadian Monument, Highway 460, then turns into Highway 463, and makes a beautiful scenic loop back to Highway 460 at Abraham's Cove. So sit back, grab some snacks, and enjoy the soundtrack and beautiful scenery. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed episode number 2, then give us a like and subscribe. Have you been to Newfoundland? Drop us a comment where you explored and what you thought were the highlights of your trip. Enjoy! Corner Brook, as of 2021 population, was at 19,316. The city located on the west coast of the island of Newfoundland in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. Corner Brook is the 5th largest settlement in Newfoundland and Labrador, and the largest outside the Avalon Peninsula. Located on the Bay of Islands at the mouth of the Humber River, the city is the 2nd largest population center in the province behind St. John's, and smallest of 3 cities behind St. John's and Mount Pearl. As such, Corner Brook functions as a service center for western and northern Newfoundland. It is located on the same latitude as Gaspé, Quebec, a city of similar size and landscape on the other side of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Corner Brook is the most northern city in Atlantic Canada. It is the administrative headquarters of the Kalipu Mi'kmaq First Nations Band government. The Mi'kmaq name for the nearby Humber River is Maktukwek. On the left, we pass the Railway Society of Newfoundland. It was created in 1987 when Baldwin's steam locomotive 593, named the Newfie Bullet, was removed from Bowwaters Park to the historic train site at Humbermouth, Newfoundland. The Railway Society of Newfoundland has accumulated the rolling stock, trackage, freight shed, and site. Artifacts also include telegraph instruments, train order sophomore signal board, train orders, phones, and historic photos. Captain James Cook is memorialized in Corner Brook, Newfoundland at the Captain James Cook National Historic Site, located on Crow Hill, where he used the area as a base for his 1760s hydrographic survey of the Newfoundland coast. The site features a bronze sculpture and interpretive panels detailing his work, which established accurate charts that served for centuries and offers stunning views of the Bay of Islands. Captain Cook conducted the first large-scale scientific survey of the Newfoundland coast using triangulation significantly, improving navigation and charting, according to Parks Canada. The historic site provides insights into Cook's life and achievements, including his pivotal role in the Bay of Islands, which established his reputation and led to his later South Pacific expeditions. Notes: lush life travel. Situated on Crow Hill, the site offers panoramic views of the Bay of Islands and the city of Corner Brook, making it a popular spot for visitors. We left the Captain Cook Historical Site and merged back onto Highway 1. A short drive to the off-ramp of Highway 460. We then head towards Stephenville, Port-au-Port, Abraham Cove, and a stop at the dried-up Hidden Falls. The Port-au-Port Peninsula's history began with the arrival of Basque fishermen in the 16th century, followed by permanent French and Acadian settlers from the 18th century onward, creating a distinct Francophone culture. The region's economy developed around farming, fishing, and later limestone mining and the Stephenville Air Base. Today, it remains a center of French culture in Newfoundland, with communities like Mainland and L'Anse-Canarbes preserving French ancestry. Route 460 is an 87.5 kilometer long, 54.4 miles, east-west Canadian provincial highway in Newfoundland and Labrador. It is located on the west coast of the island of Newfoundland and has its western terminus at Cape St. George, the westernmost tip of the Port-au-Port Peninsula, and its eastern terminus at an interchange in Harry's Brook with Route 1, the Trans-Canada Highway, at Exit 3. The highway has developed in several distinct sections. Harry's Brook to interchange with Route 461 at Long Gull Pond, 17 kilometers, was developed at the time that the Trans-Canada Highway was built across Newfoundland in the early 1960s. This section is known as White's Road. Long Gull Pond to interchange with Route 490 at Stephenville, 16 kilometers, the Hanson Memorial Highway, was developed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to run from Ernest Harmon AFB to the Newfoundland Railway main line at Long Gull Pond. Later, the USA's constructed its own narrow gauge railway line to connect the base with the main line, parallel to the Hanson Memorial Highway. Interchange with Route 490 at Stephenville to western boundary of Kippens 4.5 kilometers, known as Kippens Road. Continuation from western boundary of Kippens through Port-au-Port and along the south coast of the Port-au-Port Peninsula to Cape St. George, 51 kilometers, the Port-au-Port Highway. Abraham's Cove, Newfoundland, was settled in the late 19th century by the Duffy or Duffy family, who were likely of mixed Mi'kmaq and Acadian heritage. The community's economy relied on farming and fishing, though economic changes led many residents to seek employment at the nearby Ernest Harmon U.S. Air Force Base after it opened in 1941. Hidden Falls is a picturesque natural waterfall situated in West Bay Center, Newfoundland and Labrador. Known for its stunning beauty, the falls cascade over rocky terrain, creating a serene atmosphere that attracts nature enthusiasts and photographers alike. Surrounded by lush greenery and diverse wildlife, it serves as an ideal spot for hiking and enjoying the splendor of the Canadian wilderness. Visitors can explore nearby trails and take in the breathtaking views that this hidden gem has to offer. Unfortunately, our visit in August surprised us due to no falls at all. The best time to visit would be early to late spring. Cemex's history with its Newfoundland materials operation began in January 2023, when it announced its agreement to acquire the assets of Atlantic Minerals Limited, a local aggregate and quarry company. The acquisition was finalized in May 2023, which included a construction and chemical aggregates, quarry, and port operations. The newly acquired business is now operated as Cemex Materials Newfoundland, and was acquired as part of Cemex's growth strategy to strengthen its aggregates business and secure long-term reserves for its Florida and U.S. East Coast markets. haven't already noticed, the roads in Newfoundland are in need of repair, especially on the scenic roads. Highway 1 is not so bad, so a bit of advice: prepare for the worst. Make sure your rental car has a spare tire. Pay attention to the road conditions and look far enough ahead to be ready to avoid those nasty potholes. The history of the Cape St. George region is shaped by French fishing activities from the 17th century, the permanent settlement of Acadian families in the 1800s, and the presence of the Mi'kmaq people, creating a unique cultural landscape on the Port-au-Port Peninsula. This isolation contributed to the preservation of French and Mi'kmaq cultural identities, which were further influenced by the arrival of the railroad in the late 1800s and the growth of communities like St. George's. We are making a left off 460 to Butte du Cap Park. Butte du Cap Park is a scenic destination at the western tip of the Port-au-Port Peninsula in Cape St. George, Newfoundland and Labrador. The park offers stunning views of rugged cliffs, the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and abundant wildlife, including whales and seabirds. A notable feature is the traditional French bread oven known as Four a Pain, where visitors can experience daily bread-making demonstrations and enjoy freshly baked bread. The park also houses the only Acadian monument in Newfoundland commemorating the Acadian heritage of the region. Visitors can camp overnight in designated areas, with amenities such as picnic tables, fire pits, and access to potable water. The Breadcrumb Trail provides a hiking path along the cliffs, leading to the Kittiwake colonies, the largest in western Newfoundland. The park is accessible via Seashore Lane off Route 460, with free entry and camping available from June 24 to September 30th. As we make a left at Highway 460, the highway turns into Highway 463. This highway is a beautiful and scenic loop for about 30 kilometers. Highway 463 is the French ancestors' route on the Port-au-Port Peninsula, a historically French and Acadian area with strong cultural ties to its past. The highway serves as a scenic route, highlighting the area's significant Francophone heritage and its historical connection to early French and Basque fishermen who established some of North America's earliest fishing settlements in the region. As we drop back down towards the coastline, we drive through a small village called Mainland. Mainland is a community on the Port-au-Port Peninsula in Newfoundland, part of the French ancestors' route along Highway 463, whose history is tied to late 18th century Acadian settlement and earlier French fishermen who established permanent residences after seasonal fishing. The area developed an economy based on farming and fishing, alongside other communities like Black Duck Brook and Winter House. Three Rock Cove, Newfoundland was named Trois Cailloux, French for three rocks, by early settlers for the three large rocks offshore, which have since eroded to varying sizes, with one only visible at low tide. The community, located near Cox's Cove, features whitewashed cottages and sheds, and its historic cemetery holds gravestones of families like the Brakes. The area also has a park with a staircase to the beach, serving as a shortcut for residents. community of Lourdes, Newfoundland, located in the region of Port-au-Port Peninsula, developed in the late 19th century, and is named after the famous pilgrimage site in France. Early settlement in the area included individuals of English and French descent, with some also being of Mi'kmaq, Scottish, or Irish heritage. The community eventually became a significant religious destination after the construction of a grotto and shrine on Mass Rock Hill in 1881, a site dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Thank you for joining us on episode 2 of Driving Newfoundland. I hope you enjoyed the beautiful and scenic landscapes. If you enjoyed episode 2, please like and subscribe. We always like hearing about your travels, so tell us about them in the comments section. Stay tuned for episode 3, where we leave Deer Lake and head east to our next stop, Botwood. Along the way, we stop in Grand Falls and check out the salmon ladders at the Salmonoid Interpretation Center. Once in Botwood, enjoy a drone flight of the Bay of Exploits. Stay tuned, and we will see you soon.